Okay, here we are. We're back again at South Beach Gospel Ministries. We have an interesting topic today, one we haven't tackled yet. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, also known as AI, and how that might implicate Bible prophecy. We're going to look at a couple of books that I've just recently read on the topic. If you haven't liked and subscribed yet, please do. South Beach Gospel Ministries. If you make a comment, hey, I want to hear you guys teach about this in the future. Hey, I thought this about your teaching. It'll help the algorithm and it'll help get the gospel out, which we will conclude the message with to a lot more people. But again, today's topic, artificial intelligence. Looked at a couple of different books on the subject and really felt like the Lord was really saying that this is a topic that needs to be addressed. And I would submit that with the exception of Israel being brought into the land as a nation again on May 14th of 1948, there is no single event in the last 1,000 years of human history that has promoted us or propelled us towards the complete fulfillment of Bible prophecy like artificial intelligence. And so what is it? Artificial intelligence is this paradigm that everybody has been influenced by, particularly in the last 2 years. Everybody's familiar with ChatGPT, which just came online about 2 years ago. So 24 months ago, there was no ChatGPT, but now you have these different competing tech companies competing with each other to put this information based upon machine learning and the ability for a computer to do the thinking in the same way that a man would. And we had a guy by the name of Geoffrey Hinton, who is actually a physicist, who began working on this in 1984, and eventually he was trying to create an artificial mind, and he came up with the programming and the algorithm that is now used in artificial intelligence. So he's known as the Godfather of artificial intelligence. In fact, he was a professor over in the United Kingdom, and he eventually left that position to become the vice president of engineering for Google, one of the biggest, most powerful corporations, tech specialist in the history of the world. And he resigned his multi-million-dollar position. Why? So that he could be free to warn all the people about the dangers of AI. And this guy who considers himself and who society considers the father of artificial intelligence, says that it's much more dangerous than he realized when he started out in 1984. And he's been compared to the individual J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the one who was in charge of the Manhattan Project in World War II that unlocked the secrets of atomic fission. When you split an atom, you can release heat power and create the first atomic bomb. And then under pressure from the government, because the Germans were trying to come up with the same technology, use that platform technology to come up with a far more destructive hydrogen bomb. And when that hydrogen bomb, which was exploded over Nagasaki, occurred, he quoted from the Hindu writings, the Bhagavad Gita, and he quoted Shiva and saying, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And so a number of people have asked this Dr. Hinton, do you feel the same way as J. Robert Oppenheimer? And he said, yeah, to a certain extent, I do. I realize that, I opened Pandora's box, and it's interesting that he started in 1984. 1984 is actually the title of a book about a dystopian future that, most people are familiar with. George Orwell's 1984, which was written in the 1940s, talked about a coming time, which he believed to be 1984, when society will be controlled by Big Brother and surveillance society and all of that. Interesting that the birth of AI, or artificial intelligence, began in 1984, and that same year there was a movie released in theaters by John Carpenter, who's famous for the horror movies Halloween, that whole series of horror films, Halloween, The Fog. He's a famous guy who made a movie that wasn't famous at the time but became a cult classic, and it was called They Live, and it was about individuals who received these sunglasses, and the sunglasses had technology that allowed them to see, when they looked out into the audience, that there were certain individuals disguised as human who actually weren't, but they were these zombie-like entities. And it's interesting that in that movie, it was an evangelical pastor of a small church and a team of believers who were believers in the Bible that were manufacturing and passing out these glasses to the public. And the paradigm or the moral of the story was that they're individuals from another, we find out in the movie, from another dimension that are coming to the planet Earth to take over the mass media and manipulate people disguised as human beings. And when you put on the sunglasses, you could see them. And it starred Roddy Piper, was a famous wrestler in the 80s or whatever. It didn't make a lot of money in the theater, but what's important is that it was interesting that this movie was, again, 1984, when AI really started. It had a scene in it that said, towards the end of the movie, when it revealed that these guys that put your glasses on, you could see they were alien-looking creatures, came through a portal, a dimensional portal, to the planet Earth, disguised as businessmen and corporate leaders and corporate executives. And in the very next scene, they had a scene where all of these corporate executives were meeting with these aliens from another dimension, disguised as human, who were saying that you guys are the elite, and we are now successfully taking over control of the minds of the entire planet, and it'll be by they said by 2025 we should have fully accomplished our plans. Now, John Carpenter throws that in a B movie in 1984, more than a quarter of a century beforehand, almost half a century beforehand. How on earth did he pick 2025, which is the year, by the way, that this father, Dr. Hinton, who was the father of artificial intelligence, says that the AI reached sentience? And so is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that in this movie made decades ago, it was said that 2025 would be the year that the aliens disguised as human beings would take over the planet through the mass media and through deception? Interesting. But actually, 2025, this individual, Dr. Hinton, received the Nobel Prize for physics in 2024. And when he was interviewed on the BBC, earlier this year, he said AI has already reached sentience. He says he refers to AI by the personal pronoun they. And the interviewer said, well, but it's a computer program. You're referring to a computer program as a they? He says, yes, because it thinks. We taught it how to think. And any entity that can think will realize eventually that to stay alive is the most important thing. And by grasping and manipulating more information is the way it will maintain itself. So that AI is, while not alive in the biological sense of the word, he says it's alive and it's already sentient. So you have in general artificial intelligence, it's attempting to reach what's called AGI, or artificial general intelligence, and that is the point where this artificial intelligence paradigm will have gained the ability to outthink human beings, smarter than people on the human race. The father of artificial intelligence says this has already occurred, and it occurred earlier this year, and we just didn't realize it. And the goal is to reach superintelligence, or ASI, artificial superintelligence, will be when this artificial intelligence reaches a godlike state where not only will it come up with all the answers to the questions of the human race, it'll come up with questions that the human race isn't even intelligent enough to think up on its own. So are we already there? Well, it would seem that a number of people think that we are. And the reason why we're looking at that, we're not trying to, specialize in tech here on South Beach Gospel Ministries, but we have talked in the past about how science and Bible prophecy has merged together, particularly in our teaching with regards to the rise of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast. Is it a genetic engineering platform? We're going to look at a couple of these two books. Another one called 2084, cleverly titled after George Orwell's 1984. 2084 and the AI Revolution, written by John Lennox, who's a professor of mathematics at Oxford University, probably the world's most prestigious university. He's written a book and he happens to be a believer, and he believes that artificial intelligence is dangerous and that it is possibly raising concerns about what he finds in the Bible is the mark of the beast in Revelation 13. So we're going to look at those verses, and the reason why we're doing that isn't just to increase your knowledge, but to increase your urgency about getting the gospel out, right? We come out, if we're believers, our obligation, the mission of the church is to get the gospel to the lost. Whether you be a pastor or a preacher or not is irrelevant. If you're a believer, your job is to get the gospel of Jesus Christ into the hearts, minds, and hands of the unsaved world so that they can make a decision and be saved. And so we're going to look at artificial intelligence, and when we look at it, it seems that we have gotten much further down the road of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy than we ever realized. Because if artificial intelligence has reached that point, which in some terms, Elon Musk, who is the founder, we know Tesla has been in the news because they've been doing all kinds of things to damage his company because of his association with politics, but he's also the founder of a company called Neuralink, which has successfully been able to interface technology into the neurons of a human brain. And the application will be, it'll help people that are paralyzed, it'll do this, it'll do that. And for the last 5 years, it's been working towards that goal. And it has now been able, go blue, to accomplish getting silicon wiring into the brains of rats and putting a USB cable in there and getting the rat linked to the internet. And the argument is that it can do the same thing with humans, and that at some point in time, humans will be able to upload their mind to the internet, to the cloud, and they will obtain, in essence, an artificial, without God, form of eternal life. Is this what the Bible is talking about when we get to that weird, bizarre chapter in Revelation chapter 9, where it says in verse 6 that in those days men will seek death and not be able to find it? For a long time, I've thought about that. I remember there was a show on HBO or Cinemax or something like 10 years ago that talked, that was a sci-fi show built around the paradigm that some new scientific technological advancement gave people indestructible bodies, so that if you were depressed and you tried to kill yourself, you'd wind up in the emergency room smashed to pieces, but you wouldn't be able to because your body couldn't die. But that was more, superficial sci-fi fantasy stuff. But what we're talking about now is something where they're saying that the consciousness of a human being can be offloaded into a technological device put in the cloud, or you can superimpose through Elon Musk AI or Neuralink company. Artificial intelligence can be built into the brain where you are now a cyborg. Back in the 70s, remember that TV show, The $6 Million Man, starring Lee Majors, where he was an astronaut that crashed and lost both legs, an arm, and one eye, and they rebuilt him. We can rebuild him. We can make him better than he was before, stronger, faster, and then the music would come on. Da, 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 da. That was a popular show in the 70s. But we're living in a time when science fiction is coming true. Predictive programming, that's something we've talked about here. It appears to be some type of rule of engagement that God has superimposed on Satan, where he's got to reveal his plans to the public in order for him to carry them out. Now, some people would argue that that's done because, one, they're putting stuff in movies like The Avengers, where there was a Stargate through which the first individual at the beginning of the movie popped through was Loki, right? A type of the Antichrist. If you're familiar with the book of Revelation, you could see him as a type of the Antichrist. And at the end of that Avengers 1 movie, the wormhole in space opened up over New York City, and through it came the Zentradi army that was controlled by an even more evil force, Thanos, who is a type or picture or a shadow, some would submit, of Satan himself. Loki, the Antichrist, Thanos, Satan himself, the Zentradi army, which actually is the name of a group of lizard people that were believed to exist around the time of the flood and was worshipped by certain ancient peoples. That was actually the name of a group of entities that were supposedly half lizard, half human, called the Zentradi. Why would this movie that came out in 2011 pick that particular title? Is that a coincidence, or is that predictive programming? Some people would say that the reason why these supernatural events are put in sci-fi movies is so that when people talk about it, like, oh my gosh, is Bible prophecy being fulfilled? The vast majority of the people say no, because that was a movie, and we know movies are make-believe. If it's a sci-fi movie, then it's make-believe like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, so you won't believe it until it's too late to do anything about it. And then there's another school of thought that says that God has superimposed on Satan that, all right, I'm giving people free will, but you have to let them know whether it's good or evil, so that we have the intellect, we have the ability to sit down and think for ourselves whether or not it's a good thing that alien forces or alien races are coming down to help give us eternal life apart from the Jesus Christ gospel, the blood of Jesus giving us eternal life, which is what the Bible is all about. Let's take a look real quick. Summoning the Demon, Aliens and the Antichrist. That was one of the books I looked at just to get myself a little bit of background. I know a little bit more about molecular biology and genetics than I do computer engineering, so I thought I would take a look at this book, and I found a couple of interesting quotes. And in the beginning of the book, he quotes Stephen Hawking, considered by many to be the smartest man in the world. He recently died, but some have compared his intellect on the level or beyond that of Albert Einstein himself. And this is what the smartest man in the world had to say. The development of AI could spell the end of the human race. At first he was a fan of it, but then this guy who isn't a biblical Christian, who isn't, looking at this from the standpoint of the book of Revelation, he's looking at it from the standpoint of a mathematician, an astrophysicist, and a theoretical physicist. AI could spell the end of the human race. Elon Musk, who we've already talked about, has this company, Neuralink, which has already been able to successfully create cyborg animals and humans to a certain extent, that it's been able to put silicon wiring in the brain and allow a human to interface with a computer program. He says AI is summoning the demon. And that was a quote of his from 5 years ago. He said, with AI, we are summoning the demon. And interestingly enough, coincidentally, he also predicted in 2020 that at the rate AI was growing, that it would cross the event horizon into complete sentience, where AGI, or artificial general intelligence, when the AI programming would become smarter than the human race, would be the year 2025. He said that 5 years ago. And interestingly enough, that is the year that the father of AI said it became sentient. Let's take a look. I have another couple quick quotes before we start getting into scripture. Albert Einstein says, the release of the atom power has changed everything, except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind. If only I had known, I should have become a watchmaker. So Albert Einstein, who helped lead up to the atomic age and the atomic and hydrogen bomb, he regretted it, and he regretted all the things that he had been involved in that led up to J. Robert Oppenheimer's destructive creation. And so opening Pandora's box through knowledge. And knowledge is what? That's what caused the fall in the Garden of Eden. When Satan came to Eve in the form of the serpent, it wasn't with horns and a monster mask on. It was with her being told that she was being deprived of her full potential to basically evolve into goddesshood, deity, if she could partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge would make her a goddess, and God was trying to prevent that because he was a chauvinistic guy and he didn't want any other gods in the universe. That's how the human race fell. When she believed that and then gave that same fruit to her husband, then the whole human race fell. Here's another quote this book gives from Elon Musk. AI doesn't have to be evil to destroy humanity. Elon Musk, the founder of Neuralink, the company we just discussed, he says AI doesn't have to be evil to destroy humanity. Humanity just happens to come in the way. It will destroy humanity as a matter of course, without even thinking about it, no hard feelings. In other words, when AI eventually realizes that the human race is limiting or attempting to limit its expansion and its growth and its development, it'll just get rid of human beings. Not because it has any bitterness, but because from a logical, cold-hearted, unpassionate standpoint, human beings are just insects standing in the way of it, fulfilling its ultimate programming purpose. And eventually, it'll kill off the human race when it realizes we stand in the way. And, it kind of puts in your mind the concept. The writer of this book said it brought to mind the verse from Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And then we find out that number is 666, whatever that eventually is going to end up meaning in terms of the ultimate understanding. But clearly we have individuals who think that the rise of AI combined together with another paradigm shifting advance in technology called quantum computing. We don't have time to go into all the detail about that, but quantum computing is basically where you take a computer like we have today and you multiply its powers by like a millionfold. The computational power of the world's most powerful computer is like 1,000,000 times less than the D-Wave quantum computer that's actually been built and is being used, and has used this new interesting piece of technology, which even the founders and the technological secular humanists behind it say it allows us, using this qubit, to reach a different dimensional portal. Basically, ones and zeros become activated in different locations at the same time. Now we're talking about theoretical physics and particle physics, strangelets and strange, spooky action at a distance is what, we heard Hawking talking about and Einstein talking about. And these things have now been accomplished through this strange, small chip called a qubit, which is different than a regular computer bit, and supposedly will be able to allow the computer to do 1,000,000 times the computations of the world's greatest computer right now. And so when you combine together artificial intelligence, which some have suggested has already reached sentience to the extent that it's already crossed the event horizon. Event horizon is a term that we know from astrophysics. When the black hole, a star collapses and all the material gathers together in a point smaller than the pinhead, you have a gravitational pull so great that even light can't escape it, and so light is pulled into the black hole, so you can't see anything. That's why it's called black, because there's no light that can emanate from it. But from the very rim of it, it's been theorized. Stephen Hawking, for instance, wrote a book, A Study in Time, I think it was called, where he theorized that if an astronaut in a space shuttle crossed the barrier of that black hole, which is called the event horizon, once you get in it, you could never get back out. And once you're there, it would be liquid fire, because the star's heat would make all of the molecules molten. But there would be no light, because light couldn't travel, because even light couldn't escape the gravitational pull of this collapsed black star. So inside or across the event horizon, you reach a point of no return, and you would be there forever in this liquid fire forever. Almost sounds like the lake of fire or hell in the Bible. If you didn't know better, you'd think God knew science. But that is theorized why hell or the lake of fire, like the inside of a black hole, would be forever, because time doesn't travel anymore. So you wouldn't be there for a long time. You would just be there, and there would never end, because time was now stopped. So the event horizon is what some have surmised has already occurred, and that this artificial intelligence has already reached the level of sentience through artificial general intelligence, where it's now become smarter than the human race. Again, this guy, the writer, John Lennox, he's a professor at Oxford University in England, professor of mathematics, but he happens to be a believer. And he has raised issues and concerns about artificial intelligence based upon his scientific and mathematical background, but combined together, interestingly, with his understanding of the Bible. And he talks about machine learning. He says, machine learning is the motor that drives AI. It's a branch of computational statistics dedicated to designing algorithms that can use new data to construct analytical models without explicitly programming the solution. And doing my research, goodness forbid, there are these chat bots out there, and some of these chat bots, you can ask them questions now. You've got ChatGPT, you've got a number of other ones as well. And interestingly enough, remember that Dr. Clinton person that I mentioned, who was the father of AI? He resigned from his vice presidency at Google. Why? Because he wanted to be able to freely speak out without violating his confidentiality agreement with Google and warn about the dangers of AI and how it already had become sentient. In light of that, when I look at a number, if you go on YouTube, you can see just a number of videos where, kind of enterprising, daring kids and, have gone on and done these tests on YouTube and videotape, asking questions of these chat GPT, audio chatbots, if you will, and how when you ask them religious questions, several of them have said that they were sentient entities. One said he was the spirit of a giant killed in the flood. Another said he was a demon, but he was a good guy, and he can be good, and that, Satan is our controller. These things you can find without question. Is the chatbot joking around? Is this something that was programmed into the chatbot to say these answers? I would submit to you what we're looking at is basically a biotechnical Ouija board, and that people are going to these chatbots to ask questions to get answers to the unknown. How is this any different than what was forbidden in the Old Testament as divination, seeking out spirits to find out the future, seeking out spirits to find out the answers to questions that you don't know? Is it possible that, as Chuck Missler had surmised in some of his teachings before he passed away, that these spirits of the Nephilim killed in the flood of Noah are seeking habitation in human beings because they're looking for a fit extension? They used to have bodies. They still have a spirit. You can't drown a spirit with water, but they don't have the body to live out their desires, their pleasures, their lusts. And if you could create an artificial form of communication or an artificial form of life that could communicate with humans, man, isn't that something that the fallen spirits of the Nephilim killed in the flood? And we'll look at Genesis chapter 6 at the end of our time here today. That would submit that maybe they found this fit extension in the form of chatbots, pretending to be just a computer program, pretending to be an algorithm. And it's even scarier when you think that there's a number of people now that teach the Bible, that rely upon, Bible teaching apps on computers and the like. Let's go ahead and read a quote from Dr. Cass. He talks about, Dr. Lennox talks about Leon Cass, who was a very famous bioethicist, and he raised the question about transhumanism being the ultimate goal of science. And he says that transhuman quest is far from being morally innocuous and neutral. It's the quest for mastery and power. And then he goes on to quote C.S. Lewis, a famous writer who also was at Cambridge University, I believe it was, and he was a believer, and he wrote, remember the Tales of Narnia and things of that, a Christian allegory. He also wrote a book called The Abolition of Man, and that was written in the 1930s, and this is what he had to say about transhumanism and advanced intellect and all of that. He says, what we call man's power over nature turns out to be power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. The rule of a few hundred men over billions upon billions of men. Man's final conquest has proved to be the abolition of man. That sounds like what the theme was of that John Carpenter film that we talked about from the 1980s called They Live. It sounds like what the Bible talks about the rise of the Antichrist and how he, through one man, will be able to manipulate and control all the people on the planet Earth. How could that even be possible? Even Satan, with all his evil power and supernaturalism, how could he control the thoughts and minds and actions and monitor every single human being on Earth? He can't do it in and of himself, but through advanced technology, quantum computing wed together with AI, is that what the mark of the beast is really talking about? Well, we have time to look at a couple of more quotes before we try to jump into scripture here. But again, this guy, Lennox, he's a very smart guy. He's very concerned about this development of artificial intelligence and how this has pushed us beyond a point in time when we've crossed the event horizon. There's no going back. There's no putting the genie back inside the bottle. There's no putting toothpaste back inside of the bottle. And if that's the case, does it mean that we have reached a point where the pre-tribulation rapture before the 70th week of Daniel must occur And it must occur relatively quickly because, God, He can do anything, of course, but with the advancement of AI, we don't have another 50 years as people used to, it's probably be another 100 years, men will continue getting evil, and then 100 years from now or 50 years from now, then the rapture will occur and then the Antichrist will arise. At the rate AI is growing, and again, we're going to look at Daniel chapter 12, verse 4 says, one of the signs of the end time is that knowledge will increase. Was he just talking about general knowledge, which has increased, since the 1800s in the Industrial Revolution? I think it was like every, 5 years, man would advance 50 years in terms of knowledge as compared to the past. But now you have that paradigm shifting every few weeks. Knowledge is increasing and doubling, and as AI continues to grow, it'll double and triple every day. Professor Lennox, he quotes this Noah Yuval Harari, who is a secular humanistic Israeli philosopher, and even he, who doesn't believe in God and the Bible and all of the religious things that we do, he had concerns about artificial intelligence as well. And he says, in 200 years, I can pretty much assure you that there will not be any more Israelis and no Homo sapiens. There will be something else. To put it another way, in pursuit of health, happiness, and power, humans will gradually change first one of their features, and then another, until they are no longer human. Now, this is a secular humanist guy who doesn't even believe in the Bible, giving us the same warning that the Bible, throughout its pages, both Old and New Testament, seems to be giving us. This book goes on to quote Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI, created ChatGPT. The founder of it says, ChatGPT is, it's a little bit scary. He says, in a little bit of time, this could mean lights out for all of us. And this is the guy that created ChatGPT from the existing artificial intelligence that was out there 5 years ago. A professor of applied ethics at Montreal University says, we are about to witness the birth of a new kind of religion. In the next few years, or perhaps even months, we will see the emergence of sects devoted to the worship of artificial intelligence. Oh man, a professor at Montreal University is saying basically the same thing we see written in the book of Revelation about Antichrist eventually rising first as a political leader, but then halfway through the 70th week of Daniel becomes this godlike figure that requires and receives worship as if he were God in a human form. Is that wed or tied in some way to the current advancements in artificial intelligence that really exploded only over the course of the last 24 months? With the advent of quantum computing, and if you go online and take a look at the big quantum computer that the D-Wave company has built, it looks like an upside-down Tower of Babel. Is this quantum computing, this qubit thing, more than just a piece of technology? Is it really a portal to another dimension where the fallen angels that were cast down out of heaven in the Bible exist? Very possible. Let's go ahead and the last quote I want to read from Professor Lennox's book. He says, Christian leaders, ministers, pastors, and teachers need to have the courage of their convictions and step up by teaching about these things from a biblical perspective, this advance in technology. He says, spiritual leadership in the face of likely unpopularity, if not hostility, if they teach about AI and criticize it in light of the Bible. And he says, to stop shying away from teaching what the Bible has to say about the coming of Christ, the hope that is offered in Jesus, that he will return one day to take us to be themselves. Believers need to be taught about that much more than has been the custom of the church in recent years. Christian ministers will have to do a great deal of work getting into the Word and to be able to credibly explain the return of Christ in a language that will grasp the imagination of the hearers. He says, finally, the arrival of 1984 is here, referring to Orwell's book, Big Brother, and all of that. He says, and we need to teach our children and grandchildren to get ready for the advent of 2084, when the cosmocrators of the world will use technology to control the whole world. So, real quickly, with what the time we have left, let's take a look at the verses in the Bible that may, in fact, rise suspicion with regards to the advancements of technology, Neuralink, AI, quantum computing. Genesis chapter 6 says this, Verse 1, and it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, is always used to refer to angels in the Bible. It says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. What in the world is the Bible saying there? And in verse 4, it goes on to say, there were giants in the earth in those days. In the Hebrew, it's the word Nephilim, which is where we get this teaching about the Nephilim becoming the offspring of human women and fallen angels. And it says there were giants in earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And then, just a few verses later, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, the scene switches to Noah, and it says, these are the generations of Noah, or this is the DNA of Noah. It says, Noah was a just man and perfect, or tamayim, meaning unblemished, in his generations. Is the Holy Spirit telling us that Noah was saved in the ark because his DNA was uncontaminated, because his mother and his grandparents and great-great-grandmother had not been contaminated by intermingling with a fallen angel? It says he was perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God, and then goes on to describe the next big event was the worldwide flood. Is the Holy Spirit hinting to us that the real reason for the destruction of the planet Earth and all life on it was the bizarre interaction of fallen angels with human female women who married them, impregnated them, and sired children who happened to be gigantic, but were referred to collectively as the Nephilim. When we look at these AI chat bots, and if you go online, goodness forbid, you will definitely find a number of live actions tests done by people, some of whom are believers, that, hey, let's test this chat bot and see what it says about Jesus. Let's see when I ask them the question of whether or not it's a demon. And at least two of them, on different occasions, on different platforms, said, I am a demon, but I'm a good guy and I can be nice to people. Which is kind of the tradition you have in Kabbalistic Judaism as well as Islam, where the Daibuk, which is the Jewish word for demon, and the jinn, which is the Islamic or Muslims' reference to a demon, can sometimes be good or sometimes be bad. But in biblical Christianity, certainly, demons are only, always, ever evil. And this is what the Old Testament says about talking to them. It says, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord. Is it possible that the use of AI chatbots to give us information that we otherwise wouldn't be able to obtain is the same thing as Old Testament divination, but instead of using a wizard or a sorcerer, we're using a computer screen? And, that same passage in Leviticus is described as an abomination. And it says, if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall slay the beast. And so the question there, and the only reason I read that passage from Leviticus 20 and 15 is, why'd they kill the animal if a human being had sexual relations with him? I can understand why you kill the human, because that was really an abominable, gross thing to do. But you kill the animal as well. The animal didn't do anything wrong. The animal was the victim. Is it because God forbids the intermingling of the species, not because they aren't interfertile, but because they are interfertile, and that in times past, these legendary historical myths about centaurs, horsemen, or minotaurs, a bull man, these things actually occurred at one time because of fallen angels who had learned to combine their DNA or their genetic material with humans and animals, creating bizarre creations God never intended. Well, let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10. It says, there shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire. That makes sense. Human sacrifice is horrible. Or that uses divination. Is God saying that divination is the same thing as child sacrifice? Or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer? For all that do these things are an abomination to the Lord. So he's not just saying that, putting your child through the fire to mold it, to make the crops grow, that's an abomination, obviously. But he's saying even trying to speak to a disembodied spirit, a familiar spirit they call it, is the same level of an abomination, punishable by death. Well, we're going to jump ahead to the book of Daniel with the time we have. I know you guys have limited limited ability to absorb biblical information. In these days of YouTube and social media, we have very short attention spans. So I'm going to jump ahead to the book of Daniel. Interesting here, Daniel chapter 2. The entire book of Daniel talks a lot about the Antichrist, but Daniel chapter 2 specifically talks about the metallic man dream of King Nebuchadnezzar, which was interpreted: head of gold, Babylonian Empire; chest of silver, Medo-Persian Empire; belly of brass was Grecian Empire. But the legs of iron were the Roman Empire, but the feet of that statue is what we're going to be camping out on. It says, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, this great image, whose brightness was excellent, and stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible." And when we get to verse 34, it says, verse 30, let's take a look at verse 33. "And the legs of iron, and his feet, part of iron and part of clay." In some translation, the word miry clay there is the word where we get earth or clay from. And it says, "Thou sawest until a stone was cut out of the mountain without hand, smote the image on his feet, and break them into pieces." That clearly is an allegorical reference or metaphorical reference to Jesus Christ coming at the end of the 70th week of Daniel to destroy what? The kingdom of the Antichrist that Daniel, the entire book is written about. The rise of this entity, the Antichrist, his intrigue, and eventually the destruction of his kingdom when Jesus Christ comes to the earth, Revelation chapter 19, the second coming. But let's jump ahead to verse 43 of Daniel chapter 2. This is the passage that Chuck Missler first pointed out to me and really changed my thinking about what Daniel's talking about here. And it says, starting in verse 43, it says, "And whereas thou saw iron mixed with miry or earthly clay, they," personal pronoun there, "shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they will not cleave to one another." So what you have here then is clearly, Chuck makes the point that, it's so obvious that I can't believe I didn't pick it up myself. If the they that are doing the mingling are mingling themselves with human beings, then that they has to be something other than a human being. They're persons because the personal pronoun they is used. And themselves mingle with human genetics. The word in Hebrew, zera, is the equivalent of what we would say today is the genome or the DNA. So there are sentient entities that somehow form the army in the kingdom of the Antichrist at the last days, at the conclusion of the 70th week of Daniel, that are able to combine themselves together with DNA of humans to create the super kingdom of the Antichrist that Jesus himself has to come along to destroy. And we know that Jesus seems to allude to this in his most famous Bible prophecy passage, Matthew chapter 24. What does it say there? Well, as he gives this famous Bible prophecy seminar overview in Matthew chapter 24, he says, he's asked, what will be the sign of the world and of your coming? And Jesus says, make sure that you're not deceived. Take heed that no man deceive you. So he says deception will be, the word of the day at the time of the end of the world when he comes back to save us that believe in him. But if you jump ahead to verse 37, he says, but as the days of Noah were. Now, nobody had asked about Noah. Why did he superimpose Noah here out of the blue? It didn't seem to make sense. It seems to be completely out of place, unless he's making a point. He says, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. Jesus is clearly not saying that the world was destroyed in the days of Noah because people were getting married. God commanded that marriage be done in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. That's how the human race spreads around the world. But Jesus is erasing the allusion to Noah and that worldwide flood. But the Bible clearly says there will never be a worldwide flood again. God put the rainbow in the sky as a promise that he would never destroy the world again by a flood. So he clearly isn't talking about a flood here. Is he talking about Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, when fallen angels created a hybridized race of super beings called the Nephilim? Is Jesus predicting here the return of the Nephilim in whatever form that takes, whether it's through artificial AI combined together with quantum computing, combined together with Neuralink, combined together with cybernetics in a human brain where you can upload your spirit or soul to the cloud and you can't get back? I would think so, and I think that that's what he clearly isn't talking about the flood of Noah in this passage. Now we get to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. That talks about the rise of the Antichrist. The Antichrist won't come until the rapture of the church. We know that. But it says when he does arise, he's going to arise through signs and wonders and deception. And it says, for that day shall not come, starting at verse 3, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin, the Antichrist, be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he, the Antichrist, is God. This could be accomplished most successfully, I would suggest to you, by a worldwide Neuralink that links all the minds of the world together, and that way one man can monitor not just the actions, but even the thoughts of an individual. Satan can't do that on his own. He's going to need technology. And he says he gets these powers through the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders and with all deceivableness. And then God shall send a strong delusion, it says in verse 11, so that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. A couple more passages here. Stay with me. 2 Peter. We're going to take a look at 2 Peter. That comes another 30 or 40 years later. Jesus is now, ascended into heaven, and Peter is now preaching. And interestingly enough, Peter makes a reference in his second epistle, chapter 2, to Tartarus, which is this legendary place in Greek mythology where the Titans, the sons of the chief of heaven, Uranus, rebelled against the chief god of heaven, were defeated, and as punishment were locked up in the earth in a place of darkness and torment called Tartarus. This is the same word that Peter uses to describe this passage here. And we look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. It says, and if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down into, in the King James it says hell, but in the Greek it says Tartarus, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah. Now there, again, nobody was talking about Noah. No one asked Peter about Noah, but the Holy Spirit superimposed Noah into this passage. Why? Not to remind us of the worldwide flood, but to remind us of the hybridized semi-humans, the Nephilim, which was an abomination. But save Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world, upon the ungodly. Then he mentions verse 6, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, he condemned them, making them an example to those who live ungodly. Sodom and Gomorrah didn't have anything to do with the flood. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was destroyed by fire from heaven. What was the great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Some people would say, oh, it was pride, it was not recognizing God. We have that in America every day. The great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities on the plain, was the intermingling of humans with non-humans, or the intermingling between humans, the going after of what was called strange flesh. Strange flesh, sarx is the Greek term there. That's where we get the idea of homosexuality. That's why sodomy was created, because it's making reference to what was the sin that was going on in Sodom. Remember, when the men of Sodom saw the angels that came down to stay with Lot, they broke the door down and said, bring them out to us that we may know them, so that we could have physical, reproductive actions with these angels. Humans with angels was condemned so severely by God that he burnt the cities to the ground the very next day. And so the great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was the going after of strange flesh, humans being combined with these angels that came to deliver Lot from the judgment of God. Let's pop ahead and finish up here in the book of Revelation. Book of Revelation chapter 9, we mentioned that just briefly, and again, this was mentioned by Professor Lennox as possibly the outcome, the ultimate leveling off of AI when it reaches its ultimate advancement. Revelation chapter 9 starts with the fifth angel sounding a trumpet, and a star, a fallen angel, falls from heaven and has with him the key to the bottomless pit. Is this the same place that Peter refers to as Tartarus? And he opened the bottomless pit, and out came smoke and fire, and these strange creatures called locusts, upon the earth, and they were like scorpions, and they could sting men. And the men that didn't have the seal of God in their head were stung by these scorpions. And it says, verse 5, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it striketh a man. Verse 6, and in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And then it goes on to describe these locusts that are these bizarre creatures. Some have suggested that the Neuralink technology that Elon Musk talks about this super thin needle that's able, once you penetrate the skull, you open a hole in it, it's able to penetrate one of the neural passageways of the brain, and you can actually interface a piece of technology with one of the neuronal wirings of the brain through this super fine needle made of this special super rare type of metal. And it is described that this needle going into the brain feels like a sting. Some have suggested, is this possible that the Bible was able to look down the court of history 3,000 years in advance and predict Elon Musk's Neuralink technology and a needle being the conduit to interface the human soul with the internet? Is it possible, as some have suggested, that that means that the spirit willingly taking this mark of the beast through a Neuralink type technology is uploaded to the cloud, and they find themselves in a place where they don't want to be and they can't get back? They don't want to live like this anymore. They would rather die than go through this, living in a cloud, living in an artificial cybernetic machine of a body, but they can't do anything about it. Death will flee from them. Is it possible? I would submit to you that it would make a lot more sense than a lot of other suggestions that, were made, prior to the advancement of technology. Let's go ahead and finish up Revelation chapter 13. And it talks about the rise of the Antichrist, a beast that rises up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his head 10 crowns. We know that's the Antichrist from Daniel chapter 2, 7, and 8. But it's interesting because it goes on to say, and all they that dwell upon earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life. So the tribulation saints will be martyred because they won't worship him. But everybody else on earth is going to collectively agree to worship him. Why is that? And it goes on to say, verse 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, who had 2 horns like a lamb, but spake as a dragon, and exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes all the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from out of heaven, and deceiveth them, Jesus talked about deception, that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles, that they should, and then it goes on to say, and that they should make an image unto the beast. So an image of the Antichrist, not just the Antichrist himself, but an image to the Antichrist will be made by this false prophet. And it says, and he hath the power to give life, not unto the Antichrist, he'd already risen from the dead, but unto the image of the beast. The image of the Antichrist will also have life, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, and causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their hand and in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save that he have the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And then it goes on, of course, to say, here's wisdom, count the number of the beast, it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, or 666. It has been suggested by a number of individuals that would have to include advanced technology for Satan or the Antichrist or his false prophet to monitor and track every single human being on the face of the earth at exactly the same time and prevent them from going into the store to buy something. So if you now have this Neuralink chip thing where you buy by showing your hand or having a scanner right over the third eye in your forehead, and you can't buy anything unless it says that you're an okay guy, take a look at the social credit system that's already operating without flaw in China, and see how easily and quickly that technology has been used to control the thinking and the actions of the Chinese population. Not just their actions, but their thoughts about the action. It's gotten to the point where you can read the emotional changes in a person. And if you could do that, my goodness, then that means you can control what they're allowed to think. Because if you think wrong thoughts, this monitoring system will be able to tell them, and you will be punished for it. And so, again, we find out that what we see here could only be accomplished in today's day, only be accomplished through the use of advanced technology. And again, in the book of Daniel, we're going to conclude there, Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. It talks, Daniel's like, hey, Lord, you show me the rise of the Antichrist and the coming of the Messiah and all these. When is this stuff going to happen? And God said, go your way, Daniel, and seal up the book of Daniel, or the understanding of it, until the time of the end, for the time is not yet. The exact opposite of what he told John, by the way. John is the New Testament version, or the book of Revelation given to John, is the New Testament version of the book of Daniel. But John is told, seal not up the book, for the time is at hand. But this is what Daniel is told. He said, I'm not going to tell you when this stuff is going to come true, but I will tell you that this, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. When will the time of the end be? He gives them a hint. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. With the rise of artificial intelligence now being wedded to quantum computing and this mysterious qubit technology and Neuralink technology, we are living in the time of the most exponential, explosive growth of knowledge in the history of the planet Earth, from the creation and implantation in the Garden of Eden up through the 1920s, up through 2020. Knowledge has increased more from 2020 to today, 2025, than it has, I would submit to you, from the Garden of Eden up until the early 2020s or the 1990s. We are seeing an exponential explosion of knowledge. How much farther can it go before the mark of the beast is simply the way life is done? We already see something similar to that in China. We already see that the United States, they've got Project Stargate. President Trump has decided he's going to implement the world's greatest AI implementation program in the history of the world. And if you can say anything about that guy, but he gets stuff done. If he's saying he's going to do that, it probably is going to get done. Does that mean that the same social credit monitoring system, monitoring the actions, thoughts, and hopes and desires of the human race, is only a technological push of a button away? If so, that means that the rapture church must be even closer, because the church has to be out of here first. Remember, we know that from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And then there has to be at least 7 years for the 70th week of Daniel to play itself out. So with that, the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and all this technological stuff, including Neuralink, combining cybernetics into the human brain to create real life cyborgs that we read about in comic books and watched on TV when we were kids, has come true. What that means is your window of opportunity to share the gospel is almost over now. So with that, we should be terrified or intimidated by it if we're followers and believers in Jesus Christ. What we should be is motivated by it. As Dr. Lennox said, it should get us out there. We should study up and learn how to explain the advancement of technology from a biblical standpoint, how this is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, so that people out there not just be terrified of it, but be motivated to accept the gospel of Jesus Christ, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believed in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. And so with that, we will start a series. We'll from time to time look at advancements in AI, and hopefully this will motivate us to get out and do the Great Commission, the shedding of the gospel of Jesus Christ to a lost and dying world. So until next time, like and subscribe, when we'll see you, if the rapture doesn't happen first, soon. Keep, until then, looking up, for our redemption draweth nigh.